the idea of that turn of phrase from former late Justice Louis Brandeis, who said that states were laboratories for democracy. But states are also showing the way in policy. And one place where California has certainly been ahead of the curve is in climate and emissions control and environment and policies to lead to a better environment. So to introduce our speaker today, I'm very pleased to introduce to you the UC Center Sacramento Advisory Board Chair. We rely on the advisory board to help guide us in terms of our mission, our policy, our direction, our strategies. And Thomas McMorrow, our current board chair, has been absolutely instrumental and a great help in helping us to align our mission and goals with what we really need to be doing as a branch of the University of California. So, Tom, it's really a pleasure to have you here to introduce our speaker.
I don't have the memory richness, so I actually have to read. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Julianne Allison. I have 3 names on here to speak today. She got her master's at UC Davis, got her PhD at UCLA. I've been told I can't recommend the other institution she did undergrad that she loved, but it's not a UC, I'll simply put it that way. What jumped out about her bio is her thesis for her PhD was International Environmental Cooperation, Air Quality Agreements, and Marketing Outcomes. Now, for those of you who know Governor Brown, that sounds like a Saturday afternoon read for him. You might want to send him that. He would enjoy it. He's not going to watch. Past the carbon neutrality, we have the tornadoes, we have the hurricanes, we have the fires. This could not be more timely as California leads the way. I'm thrilled the UC Center is once again leading the way with a timely lecture. Thank you.
Hear me? Thank you all for coming out to this lunchtime talk. What I'm going to talk about today is a chapter that my colleagues at UCLA and at UC Santa Cruz and I prepared for a UC-wide publication called Bending the Curve, 10 Scalable Solutions for Carbon Neutrality and Climate Stability. And we initially presented this down in San Diego a couple of years ago. And the idea was both to look at California as sort of this laboratory for innovation, but also position the UCs as a leader within California by taking the UC commitment to carbon neutrality as sort of, kind of this indicator of what a big institution could do in sync with the state and to catalyze climate change policy nationwide and into the world. So the other people up there are the colleagues that contributed to this piece. So I want to make sure that it wasn't just these. Good. So the California actually does have a great potential for leadership. I actually really love this picture that I borrowed. The literature on from bargaining to transmission of new ideas, etc., gives a big push to your first mover. And California was the first mover when it comes to regulation having to do with air quality, energy, and transportation in that context. So just the fact that we went first, so way back in the 60s, before I was even born, California was already taking the steps that would enable it to be today a leader with respect to climate change. So that has a lot to do with it. Then on top of that, we have stayed consistent and up to date in maintaining that leadership role. So California has done things that then the nation has done, that other states have borrowed, and that other countries have borrowed. And to do that, we've also had to develop technologies. So even if people elsewhere, other forms of governance, other levels of governance, didn't regulate the way California did, they often used our technologies. So we would develop something in solar, we would develop a new component for an automobile, or whatever. Sometimes those technologies would be adopted, and then that would be useful. So here's just a nice quote that even at the international level, at the UN level, we're talking about California as being federal. So just to kind of give you an idea of where California stands, we actually do have a lot of CO2 emissions. So this is just CO2 emissions. You could look at all their kinds of emissions. Well behind Texas, with respect to the United States. But we do have a lot of emissions, but not so much per capita. So the reason that we emit so much is because there's so darn many of us, right? So we're all doing pretty well relative to the rest of the United States, but we're way down there when it comes to thinking about how much each of us is contributing. And so that's another way of looking at it. You can go even deeper and you can begin to look at footprints, carbon footprints. And in that sense, California is about half of what the United States is as a whole, well below. Some of the biggest ones are like Belgium and Luxembourg have really big per capita carbon footprints. So that's when you look at not just the emissions that you're producing by driving, by turning on your lights, all of those sorts of things, but you also look at the emissions that might be attributed to the production of the things you buy, which would normally put places like California that has a lot of people. We live close to a coast, tons of stuff comes through here. We have lots of fresh food we can eat. I mean, like, we're just like sitting at the lap of luxury here. That we could potentially have a much higher footprint, yet we don't. So that says something about how well we're doing. And then California in the world, the same sort of story happens. So if you look at the emissions across the world, you're going to find that California is high, but again, per capita, we're doing pretty well. So we're as big as a nation, which is another point to make. So when nations are trying to figure out what they're going to do, California is more their size, right? So California has about about the same. Actually, we have more now. I think I just looked it up. We have more people in California than Canada has in its entire nation, right? To kind of give you an idea. And I was talking to some of the students before this. One of the first things that you can do to be more sustainable, environmentally conscious, is live closer together. So just on that basis, right, we're going to knock Canada out of the water, right? Because we all live in like elbow to elbow. Remember the Schoolhouse Rock about elbow room? Is that one? Okay. So we don't have elbow room here, which makes us a little bit better than some other places. The other thing that we can do is look at where emissions are coming from. This is another thing that came up with the students. So if you'll remember, I was saying that we get a lot of grief in the state for having too tough of regulations. We're driving business away, right? That's not our problem here. Our problem is that we drive too much, okay? So the other thing, as I was saying, these numbers have changed. Just a couple of years ago, so if you looked at like the 2013 numbers, which are the ones that we have in our report, transportation was at 37%. So it's almost as quickly as we bring down the amount of industrial pollution, we drive more. Okay, so we know what a lot of that is associated with. We have the millennials, right? There's a big, huge bump. What do they call it? It's not the baby boom, but they had the baby something.
Echo.
What?
Echo.
Yes, the baby echo, or exactly. So we have this echo, and we've got like the Gen X people, me, right? So we're like really good. We're small. We're not doing much. But they're all, to the extent that they're driving, they're now getting in their cars. They're moving on with their families, because they can be all the way up into their 30s. Okay, so they're having their families, all of that. So that's been happening. You have that shift, and then gas prices drop. All right. So the number one thing that you can do to get people out of their cars is charge more for gas, right? They're going to cut down their driving down to the quick. Okay, so that is our issue. And then nationwide, you can kind of see that the transportation, it's like a trade-off. They're driving less, and they have dirty pollution. So if you were to look out in the Midwest, you're going to look down into the South. They're going to have a lot more problems with industry. but then they don't have as much of driving going on. Right? Okay. The other thing to think about in terms of California before you start patting yourself on the back too much, that we all do, right? You get really excited, is that we're really a favored state. Okay, we came into this in a really good place. Location, location, location. So the geography helps us. Most of the people in California live along the coast. The coast has a moderate climate, so we're not using heating and cooling as much as we would if we were in the interior. If everybody lived out in Riverside and San Bernardino County, we would not look as good. But we all live along the coast, so that's good. We started out with low energy carbon sources. We don't have to get off coal, right? We were already at gas, at natural gas. We sit on a beauty natural gas line. So that was good. And then we have favorable wind. We have all that sun, right? The number of wind tunnels in the United States, in California, is fantastic, right? We're up there with like the Midwestern states. Someone I was working with once said, sometimes they're really easy solutions. If we could just get everybody out of the Dakotas, like relocate them, fill the whole thing with windmills. We could take care of the whole nation, right? Okay. Of course, we can't do that. They do have wind farms there, but we're right up there. So we have the sun, the wind, we even have the hydropower here. So we had that. We're a service-based economy. So back when I was writing my dissertation, there was a lot of discussion about, always about jobs and everything. But the word was that California could let a lot of these jobs go. But no, why worry about NAFTA? Why worry about some of this stuff? We don't want those jobs anyway. We want to be in charge of the service sectors. We want to be in charge of finance. It's swinging back the other direction, but that's exactly the sweet spot California's in. We don't actually have a lot of heavy industry, right? So we have some things that are going on, but we're mostly a service-based economy. So we aren't in a place where we're producing nasty stuff that we have to change from. So again, nice. We've also had bipartisan support for maintaining a beautiful California. So we've had administrations come and go, but we've had both the right and the left happy to support air quality regulations, emission standards, cleaner kinds of energy, etc. So if you look at the long swath of history, we've had a lot of support for these sorts of things, and people grow up with that. They sort of kind of grow up with that sort of understanding. People start to drive, and they go and they see that whole list of the taxes on their gas, and instead of having a fit, it's like, okay, well that's what makes it free. You just kind of go along with that. And then this is another thing that's interesting, talking about California being a site for innovation. One of the centers that I directed over a period of time was the Center for Sustainable Suburban Development at UCR. And we often talked about regions and local governments and cities being the engines of innovation. And we see that in California. We have a lot of progressive local governments that do a lot of pushing. So the Bay Area is often included out there, but we also have about 350 cities throughout California that are moving in the direction, some level or another, towards climate change policies. And then we have a legacy of air quality and energy efficiency, which means all of these things have produced a set of institutions that make it easier to jump on the climate change mitigation bandwagon. So whereas some places might have to go out and create an energy commission or create an air resources board, we already have that. So once it's just adding one more thing to what we're already doing. We already have everything necessary. Because we have those institutions, we've already been developing the technologies, and we have tons of data. So a friend of mine is an atmospheric chemist, and I used to have her come in and speak in my classes, talk about how they first developed the criteria for pollutants and all of that. And she used to say, it was a big mystery. They knew that there were a lot of bad stuff out in the air, and they sort of had a list of that. And if you could imagine a cube, right? And so, that would have a number of sides on it, but in space, right? You have all these different things, and they didn't know where we were. They knew that this stuff was out there, and they knew that to reduce it would be good. But they weren't really clear about where we were in that cube or in that cloud of pollutants, like which ones should be reduced the most. So they picked like the baddies, and then we're just going to reduce all of them, right? Well, now we have loads of data, and we actually know. We know a lot more about where the different pollutants are coming from, what their concentrations are, what we should cut, which ones we can do with whatever. We have a Center for Research and Technology, and I didn't even know you could do this, right? Like collect bags of air and then test it. So folks they collect air, and then they like send it to us, and then they stick it in a chamber, and they test what's in it. We can tell you all sorts of interesting things about that, right? So we have tons of data that can tell us exactly what we need to do. We can be a little more precise than would have been the case in the 1960s, or what is the case now for places that haven't done as much work. Not so much in your major industrialized nations, which when you begin to talk about leadership, you're also talking about the developing world where they're not necessarily going to have all of this ready to go. So there's a lot that we can talk about, but if we just focus sort of on this kind of zone in, we get to 2006, we're going to think about global warming, and the basic idea in most big air quality sort of changes like this is that it's never super simple. You're usually trying to figure out where you want to go by when and which pollutants. So we had to pick one to go with. You look at the whole bunch of greenhouse gases. The big focus has been on CO2. We're going to cut that down to 1990 levels by 2020, right? That's the idea. So we empower the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, to begin to take these steps. And again, we couldn't have done that if we didn't already have a CARB in place that already had a system for connecting to all the different local agencies around the state, and for stepping in when they don't do their job. Okay, so CARB steps in if a locality doesn't come up with a way to deal with their emissions. CARB has a plan. So we have this in place and we can do that. So we had a number of cap and trade programs that have happened since the 1980s that people have been watching, collecting data. We have one in California, but the idea was, okay, one of the first things we'll do is we'll go statewide with this. We're going to continue to lower our MPGs. So we're going to have newer fuel standards. We're going to have new standards for renewable sources of energy, and new land use planning are kind of the big categories that they decided to work at. And again, we're able to act because in terms of like relationship to the nation, from the very beginning, we have that leadership role, but then when the nation stepped in, we first had our first Clean Air Act, we were able to get an exemption from that to push further. So with the most recent administration, there's been that chit-chat back and forth as California be able to hang on to its exemption that allows it in some categories to be more stringent than the state, than the nation. When I say state, I mean like the nation state, than the entire nation. So just to kind of give you an idea of just some dates and what's been going on, the market incentives piece of it, like I said, people have been talking about that since the 1980s, with a lot of this going into place in the 1990s. So even though the dates don't line up, it doesn't, anyone that studies policy, the stuff doesn't happen like this nice way where, you have an agenda, and then you kind of go down your agenda, and then you put it into place, you develop the policy, and then it rolls out. And a lot of the stuff is all happening at the same time. So people are talking about these market incentives, they're switching from command and control, they're figuring out ways and pollutants and buy wins, all of this is going to work. And boom, 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 as you move into the 1990s, you begin to see them show up. So we have two real quick ones that happened in terms of reclaim here in California, and then the U.S.-Canada acid rain agreement, which was a big cap and trade on your sulfur and nitrogen emissions. So we want that to expand. And the idea would be, of course, since we're in California, it would expand really close to us. But instead, we're working on trades with places like Quebec. But the idea is those kinds of things can take off, and when you clean up in one area, it can be an incentive, hopefully, for other areas to begin to clean up, right? So that's one possibility. Then the big one for us is the regulated transportation sector. And so we had a number of standards that went into place. A lot of our language is going to look like this: achieve maximum feasible and cost-effective reductions. Another one that you often see with air quality is that we're going to have the best available control technologies. Is another kind of one where it's pushing you, and they're not saying do this. It's kind of like be this. And whatever, it sounds a little like Apple, right? Steve Jobs, make this happen. So we have that. And as you move forward in time, low carbon fuel program, we have advanced clean cars program. I'm not an expert on that, but that's your zero emissions and low emissions vehicles. And some of these have been followed by other states. So in particular, we're seeing very close kinds of standards in Oregon and Washington. And then we've seen clear across the country and the Northeast, the other places, picked up on some of our standards. And then the one that I've been doing a lot of my most recent research on is on your sustainable communities. And so one of the ways that you get at changing your driving or your transportation emissions is to change the way you live, right? And so that's a lot of what this is aimed at, is to improve the way that we're doing our planning. So California has been doing regional planning, but we've put in place more incentives to both work at the regional level in terms of transportation planning, because that's kind of big, and giving a lot more support, subsidies and things for the kinds of planning that cities are going to do. And so we've been doing that. One of the big things in Southern California is the logistics industry. And so a lot of the problems that we have with air quality have to do with your diesel trucking. And so the freight initiative has to do with that, and then lowering our emissions there. And then the other piece of it is environmental justice. Because as you begin to force more cleaner technologies, cleaner businesses in particular, and you have trading programs, which is what I was talking about with some of the students, you can begin to have this trades, and you can imagine that you have situations, and we have lots of evidence that supports this, where some of the dirtiest places wind up where the most impoverished and disadvantaged people are. So one of the things that we want to do with the cap and trade is to pull the money that we make out of that system and put it into environmental justice programs so that everybody winds up with clean, accessible, affordable energy sources. So as I was saying before, 70% of cities have some kind of climate action plan in place. So some of the things that they're doing will include mesh with the state. So the state has put a lot of money into solar, and then cities can piggyback off of that. But folks that go in and actually look at the cities suggest that a lot of the changes that are happening in municipalities or very, very local government were things they were already doing because people wanted it or because they saw different kinds of co-benefits out of that. So transportation, for instance, making decisions about transportation because people in your locality are upset about congestion is going to solve and work with it's going to help with climate change, but they didn't do it because of climate change. Now that we have climate change, it can get put under that umbrella. But I mean, the whole time that I've lived in out in Riverside, congestion has been a huge, huge issue. And when they were putting together, there's a Western Riverside multi-species habitat planning thing. When they were doing that, they would, bring all the little community groups together. And so I was one of the people from my neighborhood. And I went, and I'm thinking, people that show up for this thing will be really excited about, public transportation. And they didn't want public transportation. They wanted to get rid of potholes and build bigger freeways into LA and Orange County, right? So dealing with congestion is a big, big deal. You deal with congestion, the cars flow more freely, they don't pollute as much, and you begin to solve some of your other problems. So cities were already doing that without even getting into AB 32. And then, of course, the co-benefits. So once you begin to kind of tinker with one thing, it can help you in other areas, either directly or because once people begin to kind of buy into one thing, the other things don't seem quite as bad, right? So sometimes this happens because some sort of emergency happens, right? So recently we had an emergency water, and so people had some subsidies and things that they could redo their yards, and maybe they stopped washing their cars as often at home and doing some of these things. Well, then you lift the emergency, and people continue to behave in that way. They're not going to go and plant a bunch of grass, so you've already saw it. That's not going to come back. But they've gotten used to maybe going to get their car washed somewhere where they're using recycled, using gray water and solar and all of that. So they stop doing it at home anymore. It's kind of, it works into the budget. So you begin to have these things spill over. And then, of course, the political platform. Right now, in certain parts of the state, certain areas, it's good to be green. That can be a selling point. So you're going to take all these things that may have other reasons and package them, and then people see them in that particular way. So that can be good. So this is just one of the kinds of analyses that people have done to begin to look at cities and collaborations among cities and how many cities are doing what. And here's the kind of breakdown here, where you can see that most of the cities in California have something going on, whether it's an actual climate action plan or it's an energy action plan, sustainability plan, it's been written into their general plans, etc. And again, these are plans. You know, I work in a city where I frequently see people not do what the plan says. So we have at least plans in particular, because some of my research has been on walkable communities, and the plan says we're going to be walkable. You know, in this particular area, we're only going to, you know, have, allow new storefront places, patios, and all of that. And then they put in like a Sonic burger. You're like, that's not consistent with the plan, right? So these are plans, which is good. We tend to think that we're going to move in that direction, but it's not necessarily perfect. So after we looked at all the laws and we looked at the history and we tried to trace which ones of these things, which pieces might be scalable to other states, to other parts of the world, this is what we came up with. The big one was to mainstream climate mitigation, which is essentially what your cities are sort of doing. It's like climate is the buzzword, and in more progressive areas, they're going to literally use climate. In places like where I live, we don't always see climate, we don't necessarily always see green, but a piece of the way California is doing it is market-based. And in a more conservative area, you play with the market. You pitch it all as this great market. What happens? You know, it's a lot of, if you do these different kinds of things, you're going to get more revenue streams. People are going to walk to your businesses, or it's going to smooth the ability for cars to get to the different kinds of shops. Or we're not going to do bus rapid transit because it's green. We're going to do bus rapid transit because it's going to help with congestion. If it helps with congestion, then you're going to have these other benefits in terms of sales and things, or in areas like where I am, where there are health benefits. So it's going to say, well, we're not going to say it's green, we're going to say it's for health. So you're mainstreaming some of these things that are going on. So you want to legitimate it and incentivize it, and then focus on California's doing really well because they focused on big stuff that they could handle and that they could do quickly. So focusing on their utilities, or focusing on solar, or focusing on something and doing it like in a big way, right? So one of the things I put up was the electricity rate decoupling. So instead of you paying for a certain amount for the electricity that you're using, especially as some of those rates go down, you would use more, right? What you do is you maintain, you find an equation that's going to tell you what that revenue stream needs to be to keep the utility running, and then you divide it by all the people that are using it, all right? So not necessarily a straightforward market kind of thing. But you look at these sectors and go, okay, what can we do? Let's hit the big ones. You also hit like fixed things. So cars are hard. That's a whole lot of people running around making their own decisions. But big companies a little bit easier. So cap and trade, even though our problem is cars, a cap and trade that's going to focus on industries, it's going to focus on production, is easier. We can do that. We can see something happening. So we've seen cleanliness. We've seen cleaner air. We've seen conservation happen there. Now we have to work on the transportation side. Acquire best technologies, automobile engines and everything. Also, some of these you can do, I was talking to students before, one of the big things that California did was adopt catalytic converters, right? Just to kind of see how these things can spread. At the time that we adopted catalytic converters, people all over the world were thinking about, what are we going to do about, pollution and stuff? What are some of the things? Well, California decided to go with the catalytic converter. You can see it, you know it's there, you know what it's supposed to do, you can manage it, it's beautiful. We buy all the cars in the world. I mean, not literally, we buy a lot of cars. So if you're manufacturing cars, what are you going to do? Are you going to have like a manufacturing system that makes cars for all these different standards? No, you're going to make a lot of the cheap cars are going to be the ones that you're making a lot of for the California market. So everybody else adopted catalytic converters, all right? So again, it's that kind of first move advantage. It's going with something easy. There are probably lots of ways that we could have controlled some of those pollutants. But time and again, we found that that sometimes just getting the right technology, one that's really easy to see and identify. I was on another study at one point where we were looking at fleets around the world, and so we have like students go out and look at cars and see if they had various technologies on them. Do they have the technologies that the law says? Do they have some of the best technologies? Kind of thing. We would then, you can also count how fast cars are going, how much pollution, and all of that. And so what we found when we did that is that the more money you have, you actually buy the Suburban. Maybe in California we want to buy like the cute little Prius or whatever, and we're going to be really clean. But the world over, they're buying that you go out and you buy the bigger cars. It didn't matter where we went in the world, the more money you had, the more polluting you got. So if you have a technology that you can put on to handle that, you're going to get ahead. So that's sort of a good thing, as opposed to going into places where everybody wants that big Suburban, that big American thing, and trying to convince them to buy something small. They already have small. Many of you that have traveled around, I'm like stunned. Little tiny fuel-efficient cars. They want a freaking Suburban if they make some money, all right? So thinking about those sorts of things, and then ensuring environmental justice, again, because everybody in California should have, access to clean, affordable transit and energy. That's ultimately what we want. And so some of the things we're talking about with students, you can get very creative in terms of how you do this. Right now, I think it's predominantly a grant project, and so communities will put in for money to do this, that, or the other thing. But California could think big. They could think about different fuel prices for different parts of the state to encourage people that live somewhere where there is public transportation to move into that public transportation. And those that don't have that access would pay less for their gas because they have to. Because you're going to capture some of that, that way. It sounds great to just put those zero emissions vehicles out there, but those are expensive, right? My mom is at the other end of the political spectrum from me, and she's very much in like this. She goes, I can't buy those cars. I can't go get a new car that's clean, and I have to drive to work. So there are other ways of going about doing things to ensure some environmental justice. Because ultimately, we want to be over here where we're looking at ways to have clean transportation, as opposed to here, LA in the 1950s, right? So we don't necessarily want with my down and dirty presentation on a lot of stuff. So are you thinking about like the